If there's one thing Pixar Animation Studios is known for, it's their uncanny ability to tug at the heartstrings of kids and adults alike. Their films possess a bittersweet quality that really help establish the struggles depicted on screen, and more importantly, the themes and messages of the movie. Up would not be the same movie if the opening 10 minutes were not entirely dedicated to placing the audience at the front and center of Carl's loss. Monsters, Inc. wouldn't have the lasting impact it's had without this gut-wrenching scene, and Inside Out would be nothing without the idea of learning to appreciate sadness and the way memories and emotions can change over time. All of these movies hinge on one scene, one humanizing moment where everything comes together and a character can take action on their newfound perspective. It's what makes the Pixar formula so captivating. What's even more shocking to consider is that all of these movies were directed by the same person, Pete Docter. He's been working at Pixar for almost 35 years and has been involved with a lot of their movies, including some of my all-time favorites. When he's directing, though, you can see a clear pattern of movies getting more ambitious. Monsters, Inc. was a strange and delightful concept, but the characters and plot are fairly grounded. Up is one of my favorite movies ever made, with yet another bizarre concept, but at its core, the movie is about one old man learning to cope with the loss of his wife. Inside Out focuses on the relationship between memories and emotions and how they can influence each other and change over time. It was inevitable that Pixar would at some point try and tackle perhaps the biggest question of all: what is the meaning of life? Their attempt to answer this question is at the heart of their 23rd movie, Soul. When this movie came out, the main takeaway that critics and audiences had was that it was complicated, cerebral, and philosophical. It evokes the works of Plato, the writers consulted religious leaders from around the world, and it attempts to answer the unanswerable. Today, I'd like to examine exactly how Pixar used every tool at their disposal to explore existential themes. Before the movie even begins, Pixar is hard at work establishing our main character, Joe. We are treated to a delightful cover of When You Wish Upon a Star, the song that plays during the opening credits of almost every Disney movie. We then hear Joe start another song, and the first shot of the movie opens on his face. This right here is the classic middle school band teacher look, a look I know all too well. He does his best to remain energetic and positive, despite the fact that most of his students are either uninterested or beginner musicians, except for one. Connie, one of the trombone players, plays an incredible solo, and you can see Joe's eyes light up. He's over the moon, but Connie's peers make fun of her. Joe rushes to her defense, explaining that her solo was great before laying the foundation of his character. He recounts the first time he ever heard a live jazz concert, and he knew from that moment on that he wanted to be a jazz musician, even going as far as to say he was born to play. During this talk, he gets interrupted by a job offer to teach music full-time. His family loves the idea, but he has reservations. Joe still wants to be a gig musician, despite the fact that it hasn't panned out for him. And this here is Joe's character dilemma. He feels that teaching music is giving up on his dreams of being a professional musician. As he puts it later in the movie,
"This isn't about my career, Mom. It's my reason for living. And I know Dad felt the same way. I'm just afraid that if I died today, that my life would have amounted to nothing."
Luckily for Joe, he gets the opportunity he's been waiting for. One of his former students is now the drummer for a world-famous jazz musician, Dorothea Williams, and there's an opening in her band. Unfortunately, he never makes it to play the gig, as he falls into a manhole and nearly dies while walking home. The movie shifts gears here, shedding the beautiful rendition of New York City that looks better than our real-life New York. Instead, it opts for a surreal, minimalist landscape with little else than a giant ominous void and a conveyor belt leading up to it. This is the gateway to the great beyond, where all dead souls face the great mystery of what happens after death. Because it was so sudden, and the fact that he's not entirely dead, Joe isn't ready to accept this fate, and attempts to escape. Eventually, he finds himself in the Great Before, a place for souls of the unborn to get personalities and find the spark of life. This spark can be anything, from archery to baking, and notable people are selected to become mentors for an unborn soul. Their job is to help them find their spark, which creates an Earth pass that they can use to get to Earth. Joe is mistaken for a mentor and is assigned for a particularly difficult and apathetic soul. This is 22, who chooses to be voiced by Tina Fey because it annoys other people. 22 has their Earth pass filled out except for the spark, and previous mentors such as Abraham Lincoln, Gandhi, and George Orwell were not able to help them. However, the two of them realize they have a common interest. 22 doesn't want to have an Earth pass, choosing instead to live in the Great Before, and Joe wants 22's Earth Pass in order to get back to his body and perform at the gig. So, they set out to find 22's spark, and unfortunately come up short. 22, however, has a plan. When someone is concentrating on something they love, whether that's music, acting, sports, or something else, they enter the zone. Here they exist in a sort of limbo, and their souls can exist outside physical reality. With the help of this guy, they try and help Joe re-enter his body, which almost works.
No, I'm in the cat!
With no way to reverse this turn of events themselves, they need more help from this guy, who is spinning a sign on a street corner. Through their journey, 22 is forced to confront the good and bad of life on Earth. At first, they react negatively, but warm up to the experience, collecting little mementos from their journey. To us, they might not look like much, but 22 has a personal memory attached with every one of them. As a result, 22 begins to loosen up, seeing the value in the world around them. They help Connie feel understood and reinvigorate her passion for jazz music, something Joe wasn't able to do at the beginning. They have a chat with Joe's barber, who dispenses some pretty valuable wisdom. Despite Joe's insistence that every second be dedicated to the goal of getting back in his body, 22 takes time to appreciate the wonderfully animated world around them. Little moments like watching the sun filter through the trees as maple seeds float through the air are made breathtaking, and 22's attitude changes for the better. Joe reconciles with his mother, and the two set off to switch bodies. Before that can happen, though, they're caught by Terry, an accountant who makes sure souls end up going to the great beyond. However, they notice something once they're returned to the great before.
22 got her pass?
Joe and 22 disagree on what caused the Earth Pass to get filled. Joe believes the spark was music, his self-proclaimed reason for being alive.
Hey, we never found out what 22's purpose was.
We don't assign purposes. Where did you get that idea?
Because I have piano. It's what I was born to do. That's my spark.
A spark isn't a soul's purpose.
Everything Joe has believed throughout the entire movie is suddenly flipped on its head. He's forced to confront the reality that maybe his dreams aren't his only reason for existing. He's spent so long chasing them that he's let so many things slip by. And when he finally gets it, it makes him happier than ever, until the show is over. At long last, he realizes that getting his shot isn't going to make him happy. In fact, he's forced to realize that it leaves him feeling hollow. He asks Dorothea for advice, and she says,
I heard this story about a fish. He swims up to this older fish and says, I'm trying to find this thing they call the ocean. The ocean, says the older fish, that's what you're in right now. This, says the young fish, this is water. What I want is the ocean.
In other words, he wasn't seeing the world for what it was. He spent so long chasing his goal that he almost lost sight of everything else, and that left him hollow. As Peter Bradshaw pointed out while writing for The Guardian, soul initially seems to indicate that the choice is between the glories of becoming a famous jazz musician and the selfless heroism of being a great teacher. But the story ultimately gestures at the idea that this is a false choice, or no choice at all, and that we are looking in the wrong direction. This is textbook for Pixar. Joe is at a crossroads in life, and the choice is between his wants and his needs. Joe has spent his entire life chasing a career as a jazz musician, and when he finally gets it, he realizes it's not going to make him happy. Throughout the entire movie, however, we've been told Joe's needs as well. 22, completely devoid of an earthly want, is free to see all the little things and to make connections in the most unlikely of places. 22 is pleasant, inquisitive, and conversational with Joe's barber, which establishes a connection. 22 showcases exactly how Joe could be living his life, and Joe doesn't realize it until right here. This has been done in movies for almost as long as the art form has been around, and Pixar themselves has been doing it constantly. In Up, Carl is blinded by the want of fulfilling his lifelong dream, that he completely ignores his need of reestablishing human connection and coping with the death of his wife. His entire life was dedicated to Ellie, and when she died, he suddenly had nothing to do, so he went to Paradise Falls. But when he got there, it didn't make him any happier. He sacrificed Russell, Doug, and Kevin just to get his house by the falls, and it left him feeling empty. And after thinking about it, he realizes it will never make him happy. So he sacrifices his lifelong goal, all of his earthly possessions, and everything he's worked so hard for, in order to make up for his mistakes. He eventually rescues Russell, Doug, and Kevin, and secures his need, and ends up happily recovering from losing his want. For Joe, the journey is far more about the path to realization. From the very beginning, we can see how little moments impact him, like when he watches Connie succeed, or when he talks about his dad. When 22 takes over his body, he sees what appreciating the little things can do for those around him, and for 22. He finally sits down at the piano, takes out 22's mementos, and plays to reflect on his feelings. As he does, he thinks about the simple pleasures of life, everything from riding a bike to sharing passion with his students. More importantly, he realizes that 22 was right. Joe tried forcing 22 to see things his way, to help him achieve his goal, without considering how it affected him and how it affected 22. Because of Joe's actions, 22 has become a lost soul, and can't help but reflect on all the times they've been rejected by a mentor, on all the times they've been told they weren't good enough, and how the system of the great before failed them. But thanks to the journey 22 shared with him, Joe is finally able to understand what 22 needs. Joe fights to make it back to 22, and calms them down by sharing a bond over all the small moments together. This helps 22 realize that they are enough. They are good enough for life on Earth, and that nothing is missing. The fact that 22 didn't have a clear, defined purpose doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, purpose doesn't define you.
Your spark isn't your purpose. That last box fills in when you're ready to come live.
A life is not defined by accomplishments, and purpose is a term humans use to put themselves in a box. He accompanies 22 down to Earth, and is ready to face the great beyond. Luckily for him, though, he's given another chance at life. When he's asked how he's going to spend it, he answers,
I'm not sure. But I do know I'm gonna live every minute of it.
Joe is now free of the burden of pursuing his want and embraces the need to reconnect with the little things in life. However he spends the rest of his life, whether that be as a teacher, professional musician, or something else entirely, he has a completely new outlook. Every time I watch this movie, I come away nearly in tears thinking about life. I ponder the movie and its themes. Of course, there's the classic Pixar ideas of emotional connection and wants versus needs. There's the idea that life must be lived to the fullest, and the way one does that is by appreciating the little things, rather than dedicating your life to pursuing one thing. I think a big reason for this movie having such an impact on me is due to how personal the movie was during its development. In an interview with Terry Gross, host of NPR's Fresh Air, Pete Docter explains that the original concept behind Soul came from a feeling of emptiness after the success of Inside Out.
Well, I started working on it after Inside Out, and it was a kind of a period of some amount of emotional turbulence, and I had always loved animation. You know, I was 9, I think, when I made a flip book and figured out this is what I want to do with my life. And having just finished Inside Out and so much success in the film, I found myself wondering, why don't I feel like my life is all wrapped up and solved in a nice bow? Why didn't it fix everything?
This was the third time in his life he'd released a successful animated movie. He'd proved yet again that he can create something audiences loved, and it didn't satisfy him. Likewise, the co-writer and co-director filled in much of the blanks of Joe's character with his own life experience.
The nature of being at Pixar is that it doesn't matter whether you're a director or a designer or an artist, you use your life as fuel. So it was very easy for me when you say, oh, he's supposed to be a 45-year-old black man from New York. What a coincidence. That's what I am. To start filling in a lot of those gaps with my own personal experiences.
Most of the details about Joe's life are from his experience, especially the conversations with his mother. I highly recommend checking out this interview. They provided a ton of insight behind how Pixar shapes their movies behind the scenes. They use their own life experience and transform it into a metaphor, into a work of art that people can understand and become attached to. And it's through these emotions that the movie can explore themes and ultimately the meaning of life. But does the movie answer that question? Does it argue that life has a meaning? I think the answer is yes, and I think that's a big part of what separates it from certain lines of philosophical thought. Throughout the movie, we aren't told to reject the notion that life has meaning. We aren't told to rebel against the absurd, and we aren't entirely told to reject the idea of purpose. Instead, I believe that the movie suggests that purpose is what we make for ourselves. It's to enjoy a slice of pizza or have a conversation with your barber. It's about watching the leaves change color, or about reconnecting with your mom, or appreciating a work of art. It's about self-expression, sharing your passion with others, and yes, about playing music. It encompasses far more than we realize, and it's important to take stock of every aspect. Live life to the fullest. Appreciate everything around you. One of my real-world mentors has an office that is completely jam-packed with the little things in life. There's hundreds of books, posters from events, mementos, and trinkets, and little sheets of paper full of quotes gathered from a lifetime of living life to the fullest. But one I never realized until reflecting on Soul is a quote from author Robert Byrne. "The purpose of life is a life of purpose." It's simple, and yet I couldn't shake it. Soul encapsulates this idea perfectly, arguing that purpose is all about filling your life with important things. So with that in mind, that's why I believe Soul has proved so effective for me. If you take a look at my favorite Pixar movies, you can see a pattern. I like their movies that aren't afraid to explore existentialist themes. Movies that take a personal, intimate story and filter it through the lens of a bizarre concept. Because the people working on Soul took from personal experience and sprinkled it throughout the entire movie, I grew much more attached to its characters and message. Needless to say, I love this movie. It has taken a place in my list of favorite Pixar movies, and it earns a score of 10 out of 10. If you haven't seen this movie before, I cannot recommend it enough. It is the best Pixar movie in years. If you have seen it though, please let me know what you think. The easiest way to do so is by leaving a comment. If you do comment though, share a pleasant little experience and I'll give the comment a heart. For example, every year one of the things I look forward to the most is picking out pumpkins for Halloween. To me, there's something just magical about picking the right one. I think I enjoy it more than actually carving the pumpkins once I do pick one out. Little moments like this are just as important as the big ones in life, and I'm glad Soul is there to remind me of them. Treasure these moments, and treasure the people that make them possible, or who make them better. Thank you to everyone who makes these videos possible, and supporting me as I make them. If you'd like to help as well, feel free to subscribe, check out some of my other videos, or share the video with someone else. It helps out a lot. In the meantime though, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.